if you don't mind, let's start with the demand fundamentals. If you could share with us your thoughts on this sort of, the short term and the long term on the demand.
Yeah, sure, man. Look, the demand picture in the long term, and long term in our language is about 3 to 5 years, is intact. In other words, it's still as strong as before COVID. If you put this in numbers, we're talking about on average about 1 million tons of lithium demand by 2025. This again, average estimate, average forecast by various analysts. Obviously there are ones who are below the 1 million mark. The other ones are talking about more than 1 million tons a year. But I would say 1 million tons by 2025 is probably a safe number if we look at all the developments and all the incentives, subsidies, et cetera, that we're going to talk about momentarily. So the long-term picture hasn't changed. And if you look at the last few months and probably going forward until 2020, we'll see that, of course, COVID restrictions and all the lockdowns and all these kind of virus-related consequences have had significant impact on everything, including car sales, including EV sales. Now, if you look at lithium demand, it's right now primarily driven by electric vehicle sales, but there obviously, there's other use for lithium as well. Use lithium batteries in energy storage facilities and many other applications in electronic devices, etc. But the real demand driver here, the largest, I would say, factor here is, of course, the EV sales. And the EV sales in the last, all car sales, I should say, in the last few months have fallen dramatically in some countries by 70, 80% for obvious reasons. People cannot go out. And even if they can, they're not going to rush out and buy cars in the middle of this mayhem. Having said that, if you look at the most recent data in West European countries, in North America, in China, and in Japan, I'm talking about basically post COVID restriction relaxation, period. This is basically, I would say, June, July sales data. You will see that EV sales have picked up dramatically. In some cases, they're actually even higher than the same period last year. So they're up by 70, 80% year on year, which is incredible considering all these restrictions, all these issues that we've been facing in the economy at large. So that is a very good sign of things to come. That tells us that as soon as the economies worldwide open up, as soon as the life goes back to quasi-normal at least, the only sales, in the car sales, I say, among the different car types that will take off will be EV sales. In other words, that will be the trend that had been in place before COVID restrictions were put in place, but it looks like it will resume as soon as those restrictions are lifted. I think that's a very important factor here, the very important issue, because that is what everything else is predicated upon. How the EV sales will actually go on, how the sales will perform going forward, especially in the next few years. Now, on the demand side, I also want to talk, before we come to supply, that on the demand side, it's also very important to look at infrastructure, availability of infrastructure and the cost of that infrastructure and so forth. And it's very important to look at what the countries have been doing, again, even in the last few months, despite all these restrictions. So I'll start with charging stations, for example. So there've been tremendous efforts to actually build up infrastructure, specifically charging stations throughout the world, and especially in the countries that have obviously larger EV sales, so a larger EV availability and so forth. So if you look at China, the Chinese government announced that in the next couple of years, they're going to be installing 78,000 new charging stations throughout the country. Some of them will be actually supercharging stations and so forth. So that actually makes it easy, obviously, for EV owners. That incentivizes them, and it removes quite a bit of, I would say, pushback or obstacles or psychological barriers that some of the buyers have when they say, look, yeah, I would love to have an EV, but look, in my neighborhood, there's only one charging station, and I don't want to be wasting my time waiting for my car to be charged and so forth and so on, especially in areas where, there's really lack of houses, individual houses. Basically, we're talking about urban areas, downtown areas where people live in apartment buildings and there are not enough charging stations. So I think the fact that China and also West Europe and North America as well, they're going to install a lot more charging station capacity will really tackle that or address that concern that a lot of potential EV buyers have had for years. So that is, I think, very important. The other thing is, again, I'm talking about all of these are recent news. I'm not talking about it, last year or even early this year. In the last couple of months, we've also seen significant announcements coming on the subsidy side. These are, again, major EV markets. So we're talking about West Europe, we're talking North America, Canada specifically, and China and Japan. So Chinese, who originally, as you may remember, Matt, I think we touched on this last year, they decided early last year to remove all the subsidies that it had in place for a long time, for EVs, of course. And then that had, unfortunately, a very negative impact on EV sales that the Chinese government realized that was not a very good idea. So they actually reintroduced them. And now this month, I think last month in July, they announced that they're going to extend it until 2022. It is very important, especially for cars that are a bit pricier. In other words, that about $40,000, then there's actually even more substantial subsidy in China for those cars. So again, that will help EV sales, and that will boost EV sales in China. When you look at the Western picture or the picture in Western countries, you will see that a very similar situation is developing there as well. So we're looking at Canada that has introduced significant subsidies. In Germany has got like almost $2.5 billion in subsidies specifically for EV sales altogether. I think if you look at the combination of manufacturer subsidies and the government subsidies, in some instances in Germany can get up to 9,000 euros in subsidies per car, so which is substantial, of course. And again, all of these countries have also announced that they're going to increase and expand their charging station infrastructure network. Again, going back to it, it will address a certain concern as well. Now, on top of all of this, Matt, again, continuing on the demand side, is further development of battery technologies. They're becoming more efficient. They're becoming, more efficient in terms of energy density, et cetera. And as you mentioned, of course, Tesla is in the limelight as usual, but also, Elon Musk and that talked about nickel batteries and all of that. Again, the good thing about all of these different battery technologies is that almost all of them, 95% of them have lithium or will have lithium in them one way or another. So for our industry, I think it's very positive. Some of the elements, some of the minerals used in batteries have been either reduced or completely removed for a number of reasons. But lithium is still there. Lithium is an integral part of almost all the future technologies at this point that we know of. So that is a demand / I would say infrastructure situation.